In 2009, an amateur video artist studying in the UK uploaded a video onto YouTube of a recent piece he had completed. After many reports and complaints, the video was taken down. The piece allegedly begins with a lingering shot of a foggy meadow that some believe to be located in Ireland. The only sound throughout the shot is a light hissing and what sounds like muffled, unintelligible speech. The camera starts zooming in on a white shape in the field. After several tedious minutes, the shape reveals itself to be an albino deer. A close-up shot of its eyes suddenly appears, showing signs of infection and possibly the beginning stages of blindness with them. The following shot is a scene of the deer staring at a vanity mirror for about a minute. After this, the piece takes a turn for the bizarre, with a deer in the reflection moving in dissonance with the real one. Zooming in, the camera focuses on the deer in the reflection, which has begun to move about in an unnatural and grotesque fashion as if something was molding it like a piece of clay. As these unnerving contortions continue, the camera zooms out, showing a shot of the real deer lying on the ground. People have described the deer as looking strangely at peace. The shot goes on for roughly 2 minutes. The reflection is still twisting and gesticulating, but the mirror itself seems to be growing darker. The deer lying on the ground then starts to excrete a dark fluid from under its tail, suggesting that a birth is about to occur. The tar-like substance continues to bubble and seep out of the deer and onto the ground. This is the point where many people claim to have stopped watching it. Some accounts vary on what happens next, but many describe a scene where a stillborn humanoid infant is birthed from the deer, covered in the dark, tar-like sludge that makes it hard to describe exactly what it looks like. Some have claimed it was a model of a human-animal hybrid put together by the artist for the sake of this film. A blurry, close-up shot of the hybrid's face is seen for a few seconds before it cuts back to the mirror, now broken within the same field from the beginning. Black and white stock footage of an audience applauding is shown in slow motion, and then the film ends with a 5-minute shot of a black screen, accompanied by unintelligible murmuring slowly fading in volume. Many say that the film can no longer be found online, while others say that the audio track is sometimes circulated around file-sharing programs like BitTorrent. There are even some who claim to have attained the film itself through such means. Occasionally, screenshots surface on image boards and other such sites, but the film itself has hardly been seen since its initial debut. A year later, the artist posted another video on YouTube. This time, it was just 5 minutes of a black screen and silence, with just a link to a webcam site in the description to serve as evidence. Viewers describe seeing a pair of dangling tail feet slightly rotating above a knocked-over chair. The creator of the video Servant Earth is best known for this shocking final piece, but many are not as aware of his earlier works, which are similar in terms of content and style. Shot in black and white, the piece, often referred to as Foxtrot, was created in early 2005. The film begins with a shot of a moonlit forest, with a slow fade to the beginning of the first scene. A gaunt, malnourished-looking fox is seen staggering through the forest, wailing and crying out in a haunting voice, with what appears to be a noose tied around its neck. The camera follows the rope to the end, where the fox's cubs can be seen dragging behind. It isn't certain whether the cubs are dead or not. The film cuts to a brief shot of the crescent moon as it slowly devolves into a shapeless blur. The soundtrack for the film so far has consisted mostly of the fox's wailing and a wailing musical track many describe as unnatural and unnerving. It cuts to a clearing in the forest. The fox is seen ambling toward the center, still dragging her young behind her. The music gradually fades into silence as the fox is curling up on the ground, getting ready to die. After a few moments, with nothing but her final breaths breaking up the silence, a close-up of her face is shown. Her eyes are still glimmering under the moonlight. A pair of small, pale, childlike hands start to caress her face. More small hands start showing up in the shot before the camera slowly zooms out to show much of the fox's body being covered in caressing hands and arms. The shot flickers out a few times before cutting to the interior of a darkened household. The camera slowly makes its way into a dining room where a family of corpses is shown decaying in their seats. On the table is the same fox, but this time it is alive and healthy, tending to her cubs. Close-up shots of the bodies follow, revealing them to possess wounds indicating a possible mass suicide. In the closing shot, a moth is seen fluttering about a dangling light bulb in a dark room when a hand that can only be described as animal-like reaches up and shuts it off. I've moved all my stuff out, called the cops, and informed my absentee landlord. I've done all the proper things, so there's nothing left to do but share my little fucked up city living story. About 6 months ago, my girlfriend and I moved into an apartment in the Benton Park neighborhood of St. Louis. About 2 weeks after we moved in, her grandfather, who raised her, had a fucking stroke, and she ended up going home to Twin Oaks to take care of him. She was living with him full-time until we could afford a nurse or hospice. Anyway, I'd been living in our one-bedroom apartment all alone for the last half-year. It's beautiful, newly remodeled, double-pane windows, great insulation. The best a couple of hicks-turned-yuppies could want. It's got a couple of weird things about it, as you'll see. There's only 4 units in the building on the 2nd and 3rd floors. We're on the top floor. The first weird thing about the place we noticed right when we moved in. The walls and floors are paper thin. I could hear every word of my downstairs neighbor's conversation at all times. I know when they take a shower, I know when they fuck. And I'm sure they know the same about us. It's weird, the more info we had on each other, the less we wanted to actually know each other. They moved out 6 weeks ago. Then the other 2 units went vacant a week later. It was kinda weird, but also kind of awesome. I could finally stomp around, watch porn and play Rock Band at full volume. About 4 weeks ago, it got weird. It was about 1 a.m., and I was going to bed, and I started to hear this noise from the empty apartment downstairs. Really quiet at first, but sustained. It sounded halfway between a hushed conversation with only one person talking and small motor running. Just a babbling, not quite regular drone. It freaked me out at first, but I rationalized that it was some plumbing or the refrigerator downstairs, something I'd never heard over my downstairs neighbors farting and snoring. I learned to live with it, as it rose and fell every evening. Pretty soon a steady tapping sound started in with mumbling. I know it sounds fucked up, but when you hear it every night, for a while you just make excuses for it. Then I kept hearing boards creaking. It's spring, my first, in this building, so I assumed it was just the old boards under the new drywall settling. Then one night, as I was brushing my teeth, there was a mighty dry thump right behind me. I just about stabbed myself with my toothbrush. I stayed really still until I was sure there wasn't anyone in the house, and then turned on all the lights. This is when I noticed a peculiarity in the remodeling. On the other side of the bathroom, where I heard the thump, is the hall closet. I open it up and switch on the light, expecting a box to have fallen off the shelves, but it's all gravy inside. I tap on the wall between the closet and the bathroom, and it sounds oddly hollow. And I start to realize that the closet isn't as wide as I think it should be based on the bathroom. I pace it out with my feet, and then a tape measure just to confirm. Sure enough, there's about 30 of space in between the 2 walls that I thought were adjacent. Again, rationalization time. Surely there's extra insulation there to keep the bathroom warm, or maybe the walls are thicker than I imagined, because fuck, I've never built a house. So in this one thick wall, some huge fucking rat must have taken a tumble and freaked me out. No big deal. I felt a lot better at the time, even better when it was the first night in a while without that weird noise below me. So, everything was fine until last Friday night. It's about 2 in the morning and I'm home late from the bar, not as drunk as I want and remembering that I left all my clean laundry in the dryer before I went out. One thing sticks out as I climb the stairs, the door to the apartment below me is closed. It's been open since the neighbors vacated. I got kind of used to seeing an empty mirror image of my place every day when I walked past. Maybe the landlord was showing it to people today. Rationalize, rationalize, rationalize. I bag up a small load of laundry and climb down the back porch steps to the laundry room, which is really just part of the garage, but the staircase in on the outside of the building and it gives each floor a little shared porch. I get down there and into the little room and I start bagging up all my clothes into this big black duffel bag. 2 things you should know about me at this point. I turn off every light when I leave a room. No matter what. My dad used to beat the shit out of me when the energy bill was a penny over the norm. And I also lock the door every time I go through it. Hell, I even locked the back door when I went down to get my laundry. I start back up the stairs and on the first flight I look up, straight through my bedroom window. The light is on, and there's a silhouette against the closed blinds. I pissed myself a little and every hair on my neck snapped to fucking attention. And then the light goes out. It happened in less than a second. 10 seconds later I'm still frozen in place and trying to figure out if I just saw what I think I saw. Rationalization lost out, thank fucking God, and I snuck down the stairs and out through the garage. I called a cab and stood across the street from the building looking at my living room window. About 5 minutes before the cab showed up, the Venetian blinds parted slightly for a few seconds, like someone was looking down on me. Then nothing. I stayed at a hotel that weekend, then a couple of buddies of mine came back with me on Sunday to see how much stuff had been stolen. It was all there. My laptop was still charging, and even my brand new plasma TV was still there. The doors were locked. I moved it all out that afternoon. While my friends were with me and I had the daylight on my side, I checked out the apartment below me. The downstairs closet had the same abnormally thick wall. Only someone had hammered through this wall, a big round jagged hole, exposing the tiny crawl space between. And in this space flat against the wall was a cheap hardware store ladder leading up through the darkness to the space behind the walls in my apartment. I don't know how he got into my apartment from there, maybe through the heating vents in my ceiling. I really don't give a shit. All I care about is never seeing that building again. I mailed my keys to the landlord, told the whole thing to a terminally disinterested cop. Done my part, moving on. Quit my shitty job, which might be the one good thing about this. I'm typing this at a friend's house on his Wi-Fi. I was going to take this convenient time to get the fuck out of Dodge and move in with my girlfriend and her grandpa, but he died 2 nights ago. Still think I'd like to head back into the country, but I guess this is like a clean slate for us. I haven't told her yet, and I'm not sure if I will. Told her our landlord went to pass it and kick me out. She's already got issues with security and I don't want to add to them. But I don't ever want to live in an apartment, or hear people moving beneath my feet, or on the other side of a wall. Never again. Okay, disclaimer, to the very best of my knowledge, this story is true. I don't expect to convince you, truth be told, I've had a hard time coming to terms with it myself. Cliché as it may be, I really am a rational person, and if not for this, I would probably be the most stone-faced atheist you'd ever meet. But, after much internal struggle and debate, I have come to the conclusion that there are things in life that simply can't be explained with reason, at least in the form in which we know it. Logic, for all the trust we place in it, is really nothing more than a candle all too easily snuffed out. And when it is gone, we are left alone in the dark, and everything we would scoff at by daylight suddenly becomes very believable. Alright, before I wax too melodramatic, here's my story. I was very young, only 4 or 5, at most, before either of my siblings were born. It was just Mommy and Daddy and me, living in our little house in Great Bend, Kansas. Very quaint. We were a young family without much money, and most of our furniture was second-hand. It was the middle of the day, summer, hot, boring. I was playing marbles by myself on the thin carpet beside the huge, old, flower-patterned couch. Mom was down the hall in the kitchen, and Dad was at work. While I was trying to roll marbles around on the carpet, I don't know, we had a perfectly good linoleum floor, after all. But there I was, swishing the marbles back and forth, happily bouncing them into each other. Then, in my overzealous enthusiasm, I rolled too hard. My favorite marble, the clear, ruby red one, zipped into the dark space under the couch and was lost. Damn it. Dad wasn't home, and he was the only one strong enough to move that huge old couch for me. I'd have to get my marble back myself. I reached my hand under the couch, tentatively at first, then deeper. Encountering no marbles, I pulled my hand out in disappointment. Then, a hand reached out from under the couch back at me. I remember the image vividly, and I suspect I always will. It was a slim hand, with tapered fingers, a woman's hand. It was gnarled and wrinkled, as if aged, and it was dead black. Not black as in African, black as in dead. Of course, back then, I didn't know that corpses blacken as they decompose, so I didn't know what the black meant. The hand reached out to me as far as it could, which was just up to the wrist. Then it retreated under the couch. Then it emerged again, this time pushing with it a little crumpled up plastic bag with a logo on it I didn't recognize. It waited as if expecting me to take the bag. Then, when I didn't, it pulled the bag back under the couch and was gone. I got up, walked down to the kitchen, and told my mommy what had happened. Why didn't I run screaming, or at least run? I don't really know. All I can say is, I was a little kid, a hand reaching out from under the couch at me didn't seem like that huge a deal. I hadn't yet learned what was and was not permissible in reality. I had no worldview. Mom was skeptical, but walked me back to the couch and explained how I was probably imagining things. She even reached her hand under the couch to convince me that nothing was down there. Later, Dad lifted the couch up for me, and the only thing under it was, of course, my missing marble, plus a few more marbles I didn't even remember losing. But here's the scary part. For years, I remembered this. I even developed a weird fantasy of little hand people living under the couch, and I, in my childlike innocence, believed that they would catch me and take me away if I ever reached into their domain again. Then, as I grew older, I wrote the memory off as a dream I had had as a child, cute, but silly. Then, a few years ago, I recounted the story to my mother. She gave me a funny look and told me she remembered it, because, after all, she had been there. She told me that she remembered me coming to her in the middle of the day and telling her about the hand under the couch, and remembered being highly disturbed by my story, since I was an extremely quiet, well-behaved kid who didn't ever lie. Then she told me about the couch itself. According to her, she and Dad had gotten the couch from the estate of an old woman who had actually died on it. This was the first time I had heard about this, but it sure explained why they got rid of the couch within a month of my story. But here's the part that truly frightens me, even to this day. The part that I have to try so hard to get out of my mind some nights. Remember that bag the hand pushed towards me? I've never forgotten the logo that was on it. And recently, as in a few years ago, I saw the same logo again on what looked like the same type of bag in a hardware store. It was a bag of utility razor blades. We hadn't always been here, but the neighborhood has. Even before it was a neighborhood on Earth, this one had been here. Here for those that would be lost on those cursed grounds. Here for those who would die long before their real life ever truly began. Here for those who never really wanted to grow up. We come from different times and we come from different lives, but one thing remains true of all of us. We lived on the earthly realm of the neighborhood at some point in our lives and died long before our time was supposed to come. We don't remember much of our lives in the cul-de-sac since the last member of our group joined us, and certainly we won't remember now when the next spirit comes. But here is what we do know. Ralph was the first to come here. Unlike most of us, he was born in far-off lands, and even in the afterlife, hasn't lost the touch of his old world upbringing. He lived in the neighborhood before it was developed. The son of a shepherd, he and the rest of his family came to start a farm on the lands that would soon turn into the place we would all eventually reside in. He died in 1903. While tending to the family's animals, the bull broke loose from its pen, and in Ralph's efforts to stop the beast, he was trampled to death. That is why, even though he brought many of his family's livestock with him in spirit, he chose not to bring the cattle along. He continues to go about the farm's business on a daily basis, but is more than happy to occasionally neglect them to play with the other children of the neighborhood. Johnny was always a lonely child. In fact, Ralph actually became his first human friend ever when he came to the cul-de-sac after his death. His parents moved onto the grounds of Ralph's former farm not long after his death. With no other children around and no fieldwork to take up his time as it did Ralph's, Johnny grew into his own mind to a great extent. From the plank was born. Together they wandered about the countryside, climbing trees and getting themselves in trouble. Sadly, this didn't last forever, as a few years later Johnny became bedridden with illness. In 1922, he died after a long battle with tuberculosis. He saw his imaginary friend Plank standing by him to his last breath. Even now, in the afterlife, without the countryside to play in, Johnny still wastes much of his time frolicking through the backyards and streets. Eddie was the next to come. Eddie was born in New York City, but moved to the neighborhood in 1932, just as the Great Depression was hitting full swing. The neighborhood, while still different, was beginning to take form from the fields of its past as families moved in and split up the lands that had once belonged to Ralph's family. Always a schemer, Eddie looked to do anything to bring some comfort to his very bare family life, even if it cost him the friendship of others. Eddie died in 1939 after one of his grand plans to swindle a sap backfired. He drowned trying to cross the local river after trying to run away from the angry kids that he had tried to deceive. Even in the afterlife he keeps chasing after the almighty dollar. Sarah and Ed came together not too long after that. By the late 40s the cul-de-sac had already nearly taken its final form as one of the proclaimed developments that became popular in the post-war era. As brother and sister growing up in the chaos of World War II, they both had various ways of escaping their lives as children of a dead GI and a working mother. Sarah became enraged and controlling as she sought to make sure that everyone around her knew that she was in charge, all in an attempt to copy off of her view of the hustle and bustle of her often working mother. Ed, on the other hand, went about it in a different way. He just shut it out entirely. In fact, he shut out nearly everyone and everything in the world entirely, becoming what appeared to be a complete idiot. Ed chose instead to become completely involved in the monster movies and comic books that began to pop up after the war had ended. It wasn't too long after this that, in 1953, Ed and Sarah died in a car wreck as their mother was taking them to visit their grandparents. Naz came a time after the brother and sister. Naz was a flower child, born to a pair of hippies, establishment in the late 60s. She was a naturally beautiful girl that had always had a way with boys and men alike. She lived life on a whim and would often go about flirting and playing without any intentions. She died in possibly the most horrible way of any children in the neighborhood. In the summer of '79, a serial killer who had broken out of a local asylum had slipped into her house in the dead of night and raped and killed her along with her entire family. In the trauma of these events, she, in a way similar to Ed, shut out the world entirely and forgot of her parents and siblings, which is why in the afterlife she doesn't ever receive demands from the non-existent parents, unlike many of the others. This gives her much more time to lounge around and party as she often does. It didn't take too long before Ed joined the rest of the neighborhood. He was the child of two highly controlling professionals in the age of greed that, despite their constant absence, dominated his life. As such, Ed became quite the intellectual and a rather meek and shy figure. Always the curious type, he loved to experiment when given the time away from school and the constant chores of his parents. This would lead to his untimely demise in 1986 as a gas leak, combined with a Bunsen burner from one of his experiments, tore him and his house to pieces. Being the timid and subservient type, between various misadventures, Ed continued to follow the written orders of his parents long after his death. Kevin was the next to join the group. He was born to the day of Ed's death and is in many ways his polar opposite. Kevin came from a broken home and developed a bold personality. In life he was cynical and angry and took it out on many of the other children. His abusive father would rarely pay him any attention in life and would end up bringing about the end of it. In a drunken rage, his father beat him after Kevin attempted to stand up to him. He died on the way to the hospital in the winter of 1999. His father spent the rest of his life in prison. In the afterlife, Kevin changed his perception to the opposite of what his life really was, with a distant father who would shower him with gifts. However, he continued to maintain his bullying, even in death. Jimmy was the last to come to the cul-de-sac. He died in 2000, not long after moving into the house that Kevin's father had once lived in. He had had leukemia since he was barely old enough to walk. As such, he was always a very sickly child, and due to his overprotective parents he never really got to be around other children. He lived his days out in a small bedroom completely neglected by the outside world. Jimmy lingered for quite some time in a state of near death, but in the end finally caved into the suffering of his lifelong illness. The Kanker sisters were different from any other denizens of the cul-de-sac. They were never of the earthly plane of existence. Instead, they are the children of demons, not too dissimilar from the succubi of human lore. They seem to possess abilities impossible by the standards of the others, such as the ability to appear nearly anywhere instantly. They were sent from hell to torment the already tortured souls of the neighborhood. Surprisingly, they are attracted to the Eds for unknown reasons, although it is speculated that they are the weakest-willed members of the neighborhood and are seen as easy targets by them. Despite that, they are universally loathed and often feared by everyone, including the Eds.